Everyone's annoyed with you, you know. Just because you're the oldest here doesn't mean you're not a burden. Have you realized that? You'd be better off retiring voluntarily." I wanted to say something back, but I couldn't find my voice. I wasn't even sure if I was breathing properly. That's how shocked I was. Maybe I am a burden, just like he said. Somewhere deep down, I had already come to terms with it. After 30 years of service, all the employees around me had become my juniors. I've always been at this factory, but all my peers have moved up to the head office. However, I was never really interested in climbing the corporate ladder. I've always preferred working quietly on detailed tasks over communicating with others and being entrusted with executive roles. Being not very articulate and not good at teaching, I hardly ever conducted training for newcomers or mentored juniors. My days were consumed by sheer dedication to manufacturing. That suited me much better. Technically, I did have a desk at the head office. I've been with the company as long as the current president, Mr. Johnson, so am occasionally tasked with office duties there, given my extensive knowledge of the company. Seth, now a department manager at the head office, was one of my peers. Out of camaraderie, or perhaps for convenience, I sometimes take on his managerial duties at the head office in his absence. But truth be told, I feel much more at ease on my factory days. My wife understands and accepts me for who I am. In fact, I met her here at this factory. She used to work in the factory's office. So, she gets my job and knows my personality well. Living with my wife and being able to create the parts I love, I was content with my daily life. That day, as usual, I joined the morning assembly, and there were two unfamiliar men in suits. "I have been appointed as the assistant factory manager. My name is Eric. I look forward to working with you." One of the men introduced himself. At 24 years old, he seemed friendly and approachable with his bright smile. The other man greeted us with formality. "Today, we are also conducting an inspection. As some of you may know, he is the son of Mr. Johnson. Please be respectful." He was about to continue when Eric gestured for him to stop. "Don't worry about me being Mr. Johnson's son. I'm here to support you all from behind the scenes, to help you create even better products." He was here to get a feel for the factory, as he explained. The head office is within walking distance, and it's not uncommon for them to visit for inspections like this, so I just got on with my work as usual. "Son of Mr. Johnson, huh?" I had no idea. Being an assistant factory manager at such a young age is impressive. Well, connections must play a part. The factory was slightly abuzz, whispering about Eric. But thanks to his positive attitude, no one was overly critical. The general consensus was favorable. As for me, whether he got the position for connections or not didn't matter. I was genuinely impressed by his energetic greeting and ambition, and I welcomed him wholeheartedly. Eric continued to visit the factory for inspections. Although he was appointed as the assistant factory manager, he lacked on-site experience. He seemed to be working hard to fill that gap by learning, which also left a good impression. This is the assembly line for the parts. Is it always this number of people? Yes, give or take one or two depending on the day. Each time, Eric was accompanied by members from the head office, getting detailed explanations about the factory operations. He seemed to be quickly picking up on the work, raising hopes that he would become a capable assistant factory manager. Then, one day. On this day too, Eric, who had come for an inspection, ended up causing a commotion. He approached a group of young workers who were focused on their tasks without giving any warning. Safety comes first in the factory. For those working, it's crucial to be aware of their surroundings and to ensure that the area is clear of obstacles. After all, a single misstep could lead to a serious accident. Concerned for his safety, I was about to call out to Eric. However, before I could, It seemed that one of the young workers noticed him first and stopped him with a shout, "Eric," almost sounding angry. From the perspective of the factory workers, his response was justified, but Eric was yet to understand that. Thinking he had been yelled at for no reason, Eric glared back at the worker. "Hi, I'm sorry, I thought it was dangerous." The worker, having been glared at by the son of Mr. Johnson, froze. The atmosphere became tense, and nobody knew how to react. As an elder, I felt it was my duty to intervene, so I hurried over to explain the situation, but Eric seemed to take great offense and even glared at me. Not being particularly good at speaking, I was unable to smooth things over any further. Nothing more happened that day, but Eric left for the head office earlier than usual. Looking back, this incident was just the beginning. 3 days later, the factory was in complete disarray. There had been a sudden order from above to expedite the delivery of the parts we were manufacturing. It seemed to have been instructed by Eric. Why would he do this? It was unclear whether this was retaliation for being yelled at, but no one dared to oppose him, given that he was the son of Mr. Johnson. So, we all ended up working overtime on our day off to meet the new deadline. Despite this, Eric came for his usual inspection. Wanting him to understand the situation on the ground, I approached him. "Eric, rushing the deadline will only lead to more mistakes. Is there any way you could extend it back to the original schedule?" I pleaded, but Eric seemed uninterested in listening to my opinion. Snorting, he said, asking for a favor from someone younger, "Don't you have any pride?" I was taken aback. He seemed like a completely different person from the one who had first greeted us. So, this was his true nature. "Well, I'm not free either. Maybe you should get back to work soon, don't you think?" As Eric walked away towards the back of the factory, his leather shoes clicking on the floor, I found myself once again unable to retort. Nevertheless, we managed to meet the expedited deadline through relentless work. I'm exhausted. Give me back my weekend. Everyone comforted each other as they left for home. On my way to the locker room, I overheard a voice coming from the office area. "If the same thing happens again, I'll have to consider quitting. I can't pick up my child on time." It was probably one of the part-time staff. The voice was filled with anxiety about the future. Office work is more extensive and critical than most realize, and not just anyone can handle it. I only fully grasped this after hearing it from my wife. It's unacceptable to lose hard-working colleagues due to the recklessness of upper management. Checking my schedule, I saw that I was due at the head office the next day. I resolved to speak to Eric about this issue. The next day, as I arrived at the head office, Eric happened to be in the lobby. As I spoke up, Eric looked at me as if to say, "You again." Despite feeling intimidated, I did my best to calmly explain the situation on the ground, including that some were considering quitting due to the rushed deadline. I asked him to refrain from making such unreasonable demands in the future. Eric didn't seem receptive and half listened to me while deliberately letting out a sigh. "You're just old-fashioned. Seriously, why don't all you useless relics just retire early?" I was at a loss for words after being suddenly bombarded with insults. Seeing me speechless, he sneered with utter disdain, saying, "Everyone's actually bothered by you. Just because you're the eldest, you even have a desk at the headquarters, you realize you're a burden, right?" I wanted to retort, but no words would come out. I wasn't even sure if I was breathing properly. That's how shocked I was. Perhaps I was indeed outdated, and it was true that my presence might have been hindering the younger generation's opportunities, making me a burden. And maybe being called a burden was inevitable. To make matters worse, Eric added, "You really should consider retiring voluntarily soon." "I see. Understood, I'll do that." The words I managed to muster were in resignation. Deep down, I must have agreed with him. Eric seemed surprised that I agreed so easily, but quickly responded with a smile, saying, "Oh, good. I'm glad to see you're reasonable." Thinking back, that smile was probably the same one he had when he first greeted us. The next day, I promptly took my resignation letter to the office. The young workers at the factory all tried to stop me, but I thanked them, saying thank you, and yet I ignored all their pleas. It was probably just politeness. If my absence makes it easier for everyone to work, then that's for the best. After saying goodbye to everyone at the factory, I headed home, where my wife had prepared dinner. I had told her the previous day that I was quitting my job. She didn't agree or disagree with my decision and didn't ask for a reason. I was grateful to her as I enjoyed the delicious meal. It had been a long time since I had lunch with my wife on a weekday. Despite feeling a sense of loss from quitting, I also felt relieved. However, that peace was short-lived. I was truly shocked when Seth, a manager and my peer, called in a panic. "Quitting so suddenly? I need an explanation, please come back." It turned out that after confirming my resignation, Eric had my desk at the headquarters cleared immediately. He was satisfied seeing the space cleared when Mr. Johnson and Seth, the manager, returned from their overseas trip. They were both stunned for a moment. "His desk is gone. Why is that?" Asked by his father, the president, Eric proudly explained that I had decided to retire voluntarily. He was being defiant about the deadlines, and for the sake of the juniors and newcomers, it's better if such a burden retires early, he said. Seth seemed overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. That's why he hurriedly called me in a panic. In the background, I could hear Mr. Johnson yelling at his son, "What have you done?" Hearing that made me reconsider. Perhaps I had been too harsh on Eric. He probably wasn't informed about the relationship between me, Mr. Johnson, and Seth. Mr. Johnson, Seth, and I all attended the same technical high school. Mr. Johnson, who was set to inherit his father's factory, scouted the two of us during job hunting. Seth, now a manager, was actually planning to go elsewhere, but he joined a company with me because I accepted the offer. I remembered Seth saying, "With you here, we're definitely safe." And how Mr. Johnson once told me, "We've expanded overseas thanks to you," praising my technical skills. Though I was always skilled with hands-on tasks, I believe the company's success was due to Seth's and Mr. Johnson's exceptional sales skills, not mine. I felt truly indebted to Mr. Johnson, who had always looked out for me, someone who knew nothing but to work diligently. So, when Seth pleaded with me in a beseeching tone to please come back, I was genuinely pleased. Yet, the words Eric had said came flashing back, making me hesitate once again. Am I holding everyone back? My voice carried a note of uncertainty. But Seth immediately denied it. "What are you talking about? There's no way that's true. Oh right, I even bought you a souvenir, please come back soon." My wife, hearing the conversation, smiled happily from where she stood. Arriving at the headquarters with mixed feelings, Mr. Johnson immediately came over to apologize. "I'm really sorry for what my foolish son did. I had no idea this happened while we were away on a business trip. I'm sorry too. I became unsure of what to do. It was thoughtless of me." As I apologized, both Mr. Johnson and Seth's faces relaxed in relief. Later, having learned the whole story, Eric came to apologize to me. Seeing him apologize sincerely, without resistance, made me think. I rarely had to apologize to anyone like this. After all, I had always left the bothersome task of communicating to my peers. The more I thought about it, the more Eric seemed more mature than me. Since then, it became my duty to mentor Eric during his inspections. It was an order from the president. This incident made me want to be more observant of my surroundings, and I started to teach him not just about manufacturing but also about administrative tasks in detail. At first, Eric seemed awkward and kept his gaze down, but when I shared stories about his father working hard as an assistant factory manager, he listened with keen interest. On days other than inspection days, he began to actively engage in training the younger workers. Gradually, people started approaching him with questions, and lately, the younger employees have shown significant growth. One day, while I was at the headquarters, Eric invited me out for lunch. I was curious about the invitation, but he wanted to apologize again. "I'm truly sorry for what happened before." "No need, I'm actually grateful to you." Hearing this, Eric looked bewildered. His face seemed to say, "I don't understand," which made me laugh. "I am who I am today because of you. Because of me." After all, it was Eric, regardless of the circumstances, who gave me the opportunity to interact with others. If it hadn't been for that incident, I might still be just focusing on my tasks, hardly communicating with anyone, becoming the burden he initially accused me of being. When I told him, "I'm glad I met you," Eric showed a mixed expression of confusion and happiness, unlike any I had seen before. This smile was far more genuine and relatable than a polite one he had when we first met.